Hey
Hi
guys.
guys.
Hello everyone and welcome to this course, Cloud Foundations. I'm Nirmalya Mukherjee, I'll be your faculty walking you through the particular course. A little bit about myself before we get started. So how did I get started with cloud computing? It was late 2000s when everybody was talking about cloud computing, big data, and I just happened to be part of a project which required us to evaluate options by which we can take existing enterprises infrastructure and offload that to another data center provider or water provider. So that was my first exposure, if you will, to cloud computing. So obviously from that point forward it was Google, then obviously everybody talks about cloud computing, if it's AWS has to be done. So these are some of my experiences. Predominantly I'm a developer, right, working on projects with startups, and I've been very fortunate in my career to work with services organizations, product companies, and even as an independent consultant. So with that, let's begin. That's my first slide for you. There's nothing called as cloud computing, and here we are talking about a course called cloud computing. It's somebody else's data center, somebody else's infrastructure that we are ending up using. At the end of the day, let's just think about it and take a step back. What is computing? Computing will require us some core concepts, right? Like for example, infrastructure, networking, storage, managed services, etc. Which until now, or maybe you can safely say a couple years back, organizations have been building. There were X number of organizations, there were X data centers, X installations of the same application, same database, that experience. And in exchange, right, there is a commercial agreement. Well, you use this, you pay for that, just like any other services or any other product that you may choose. The other thing is SETI at home. Now, why are we talking about such for extraterrestrial intelligence in a cloud computing session? Well, if you really look at it, I think it was University of Berkeley, mid 1990s. They created this program called SETI at home. And what you could do is you could download this particular software, put it on your machine, laptop, desktop, whatever it is, doesn't matter. And what it would do is periodically it will go out there and download these recordings from space. Right, this little pieces of sound from space, it would download and run multiple iterations of Fourier transformation and all those other mathematical, operations to figure out if there is anything meaningful in those recordings. This I'm talking mid 1990s. What is this form of computing? Isn't this distributed computing? So why are we saying that distributed computing is essentially a creation of cloud? It's not. Cloud, more and more you'll realize, is essentially a very smart combination of some of these mature, already proven approaches that has been around and surrounding us for a very long period of time. And we will definitely get into a whole bunch of details with respect to that. Let's now take a step back and spare a moment for the enterprise. If you're looking at a large enterprise, well, actually large enterprise, small enterprise, medium enterprise, doesn't matter. Any enterprise who's in the world of business, right? What do they care about? First thing, as I mentioned earlier in the picture before that you saw, right, you've got your users, your end users. As a business, you have your end users. Very important entity. So one of the foremost elements that an enterprise worries about is service availability. Is my service available to my end user? My end user can choose to come at 1 in the afternoon or 3 in the morning, right? Is my service available, right, at the right performance level to that end user of mine? A very, very important dimension that a business worries about. Second, in today's world, if you really look at it, right, it's a world of consumers, isn't it? The world has shifted significantly from, let's say, the late 90s to where we are at today. It's all about consumers. And there's one thing, consumer growth cannot be predicted. So you can have a situation where your infrastructure is getting hit at, let's say, 8 a.m. in the morning with, let's say, X, and within 15 minutes, it becomes 10X. You can't control that. And you know what the point is? You don't want to control that either. You would want more and more your customers coming in, interacting with your application, right? Obviously, because that's good for business. Which means that the moment you're talking about these user growth, right, and unpredictable user access throughout the day, and in fact, I would also add night. That means you need to have, and yes, of course, how can I forget, around the globe, right? Are we saying that, hey, here's a product and the user base is only the region that I'm in? Absolutely not. We are a connected world these days. Your users can come from any country at any point in time. That means you're literally looking at and staring at 24/7 data center operations, right? And you can't say that, hey, it's 3 a.m. in certain time zone, which could very well mean at, maybe in the afternoon in some other time zone, my service is, not available. Cannot take that approach. Second. So these are some of the first predominant elements. The second category of, aspects that a business really worries about is how do I make my infrastructure elastic? And this term we will come across many, many, many times, right, as we move forward in this particular course. So what does elasticity mean? If you look at the simple definition, you catch hold of something, you stretch it out, it expands, you let go, it shrinks back again. If I have to apply this technique to infrastructure, won't it be really nice to say that, look, when my application is being used heavily, you give me more and more servers. But when my utilization begins to dip, you take those servers back again. Why am I doing that? Why is there such a nice desire for a business? Because the more servers you have, the more it costs you. And the lesser servers you have, the lesser the cost. So businesses are getting more and more sensitive to the fact that why am I sitting on this huge amount of infrastructure with very low utilization? And if you all recollect, the entire 2000s era was all about virtualization. And that is another topic that we will talk about in conjunction with other important and interesting topics such as containerization. But let's just hold on. If we proceed further, what is the next thing that a business worries about? Redundancy. How can I have my service duplicated in multiple different places? Why that is required? Unfortunately, mankind has not been able to make a hardware that never fails. And you know what? The failure will happen when you least expect it. We all talk about Murphy's Law, right? Believe me, it always comes true. Right? So the idea of redundancy is so critical, so core to our data center operations that it is something that is like ABCD of data center operations, right? So that is an element that I have to now worry about. So if you really look at if I am responsible for managing data centers, now I have to maintain at least 2, right? Preferably in different geographies to make sure that redundancy is taken care of, right? As we move on forward, when we create our data center, right, what happens? We procure hardware. These hardware have a lifespan. The usual lifespan people consider is 3 years, right? So every 3 years, they go in for what they call it as an IT refresh. So they basically replace the existing hardware and bring in newer hardware. So if you really think about it, your infrastructure, right, let's assume just a number that I'm pulling up, maybe has 1,000 machines in your data center. Will you go out there and procure all 1,000 machines exactly at the same time? No, right? You build it up over a period of time. Now think about your situation like this. Then you have these 1,000 machines with different stage of their life cycle. The very first set of machines that you procured when you started your application for the first time will age out first, and followed by the rest of the machines. So after maybe about 3 years or so, you'll find yourself in a constant flux of your infrastructure overhaul. Is that something that you'll be building? Is that something that you should be interested in? Who are you? You could be maker of a bag of chips. You could be a maker of an automobile. You could be maker of an aircraft engine. You could be maker of an MRI, CAT scan, right? You would rather focus your energies on your core business, or would you focus your energies on data center, right? A choice enterprises are taking now and saying, I don't think so. Let me focus on what I'm good at. Let me focus what I'm here for, what my core business is, and I'm going to leave my data center operations to someone else. The other thing, and this is more of a concern rather than something that quote unquote a business really worries about, it usually stems from the IT side of things, is lock-in. So the moment you go out there and let's say buy a car, right? You're not going to replace your car tomorrow, right? You're going to stay with your car for at least a good period of time where you want to really, really make good use of the investment that you've made, right? Now, what is this? It's a form of lock-in. So you are essentially, the moment you adopt a particular cloud provider, it could be any cloud provider, right? The moment you start leveraging that cloud provider's capabilities, the word lock-in becomes extremely important, right? So therefore, it's very important for us to understand, how can I create a cloud architecture that allows me some leeway, some wiggle room to not have 100% lock-in? Is that a goal that is achievable? Well, yes and no. It kind of depends on your architecture. That's a classic consulting answer, isn't it? But it is possible, but there are some costs, right, associated with it. Something that we will touch upon as we move on forward. The other thing, if you really look at it, what's the most important thing apart from the core business that an enterprise has? The data that it generates. The huge volumes of data, huge or otherwise, it just doesn't matter, right? Is my data safe in the cloud? How secure is the data at rest? On the disk when I store the data, right? Is it encrypted? Do I have to take that responsibility, or you, cloud provider, can you take that on my behalf? So security, confidentiality, encryption, etc. is extremely important regardless of any business that you talk about. And especially so when you're talking about a financial institution, a bank, for example, right? One of the reasons why the whole financial industry is so skeptical about cloud is the word public. When we basically say public cloud, that completely spooks the financial institution, right? To say that public cloud, what do you mean public cloud? Are you saying if I put my data out there, it becomes publicly accessible? Well, that's not necessarily true. And we will get into the multiple dimensions and definitions of cloud computing, and you will see as to what exactly means. Next, many a times we want to answer ourselves a question. Who did this? When did this happen? Why did it happen? What caused this to happen? What does this happen? Maybe a physical infrastructure going down, loss of a disk, loss of connectivity. Who added this infrastructure? Who made these changes? All of these fall in the bucket of audit trail, an extremely important dimension of cloud computing. And if you really look at, if I have to manage my own data centers, right, what happens is these are the things that I have to set up from ground up. And every single organization is building these capabilities. And when you talk about audit trailing, it's probably one of the last elements that an IT infrastructure or a department that is looking to get the infrastructure going, right, considers. It's only when, right, something bad happens, right, that's when it becomes the number one priority. Where's my audit trail? And that's when the mad scrambling begins to happen, right, to say that, oh, we didn't set this up, we missed that particular thing or that action, etc. So cloud computing will give you some of these capabilities as a managed service, which makes it a whole lot easier for the enterprises